What's happening, Chiefs Kingdom? We're about to embark on a journey. I don't know how many videos it's going to take, but I am on a mission to make a prediction for the 2022 season to see what kind of impact the departure of Tyreek Hill has on the Chiefs offense. We've talked about it on Twitter all over the place. Whether or not Mahomes is going to look good, Tyreek Hill is going to look better, we don't know. I don't know. But I'm embarking on a journey to sift through some stats, see where the Chiefs offense may be heading next season. And that's what we're going to do in this video. We're taking our first step on that journey. It's RGR football. Let's go. All right, so I really don't want to have to do this, but corporate sent me an email and said I have to read this legal disclaimer before we start this video. So let's go. This video contains in-depth mathematical and statistical discussion. If you are averse to math, hate math, or are generally discomforted by math and statistics, then this video may be dangerous for you. If you notice irritability, hostility, confusion, or changes in behavior, stop watching this video immediately. Otherwise, let's get crazy with the nerd stuff. Put myself in the corner. So, embarking on this journey, our first step, I decided to look at how defenses impact the Chiefs offense during the Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid era. While I was uncovering a bunch of things with that data, I decided to lump in data for Josh Allen and also Joe Burrow. So I collected data from all the games for those three quarterbacks. I also accumulated points, yards, passing and rushing touchdowns, and opponent defensive SRS scores. We'll talk about the SRS scores in a little more detail here in a little bit. And then I'm going to use the correlation coefficient to see how the defenses impact these quarterbacks. When I first started off on this plan to look up this data, I wanted to be able to say something cool. I wanted to be able to say Andy Reid doesn't care about the defenses that he's playing. And that comes from a feeling where I've watched many Chiefs games and it's like, dang, the Chiefs hung 30 points on that really good defense. Dang, they hung 45 on this fifth-ranked defense. I wanted to be able to say statistically that Andy Reid doesn't care about the defense that he's facing. It doesn't matter. And then I could use that to be lazy next season. Or I could use that to be lazy during my prediction for next season, where I didn't have to account for the defenses that the Chiefs are going to play in 2022 to make their prediction for how the offense will do. And we'll see whether or not I can be lazy in that regard. Before we go any further, I want to talk about the defensive SRS scores and how they're calculated. So SRS scores come from Pro Football Reference, which is a website that I love. I do a lot of my data work from there, data mining from there. And it uses matrix math to account for each team's relation with one another and how they perform. So imagine an interconnected web that has each team's performance against each other evaluated mathematically. They break it into offensive rankings and defensive rankings. It comes out with a simple score when you do the matrix calculations, and that simple score is then used to run the lines that Vegas uses. So a team with a high defensive SRS score has a better defense. A team with a low offensive SRS score has a worse offense. You add those two numbers together, and that's how that team would do it in the point spread. So, for instance, if you have one team that had a total SRS score of 10, and another team had a total SRS score of -3, then the spread for that game would be 13 points. The way that the matrices work is that they take into account every single team's relation with one another. So if it's week 5, it takes into account all 5 teams that team has faced, and how they fared against them, as well as how those teams fared against every other team. So it's a really sophisticated method for evaluating teams. It focuses mainly on points, but the higher the number, the better they are. The numbers can go below 0, and essentially they're a really true representation of how good a defense is. So the goal of using the defensive SRS score is we want to find the defense's effect on the Chiefs' offense's production, as well as the Bills and the Bengals with Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. So to do that, we're going to use that defensive SRS score along with a correlation coefficient. So the best way to describe how a correlation coefficient works is to show it in an example. And we're going to get a little silly here, but imagine there exists an imaginary expansion team in the NFL that crops up in maybe the last 3 or 4 years. This team is known as the Radioactive Boars. And so the Radioactive Boars have a really weird team. They have a bunch of guys who show up versus good defenses, and they really play their hardest. They perform well. And then when they play a worse team defensively, they just, utterly fail. They don't bring forth any effort. They're terrible versus teams with bad defenses, great against teams with good defenses. So the Radioactive Boars in week 1 of that season play the Buffalo Bills. And the Buffalo Bills have a really good defense. And the Boars hang 50 points on them. So you can see in this graph here, the Buffalo Bills are high on the defensive SRS value, and the Boars scored a lot of points against them. In this graph, the y-axis represents defensive SRS, and the x-axis represents points scored. So week 1, they hung a lot of points on the Bills, who have a good defense. Week 2, they face the Patriots, who also have a really good defense, and they do the same thing again. They beat up on a good defense. Next week, the next 2 weeks, they play the Jets and the Falcons, both who have a terrible defense, and they do abysmally. They don't score very many points at all. So what the correlation coefficient is essentially a slope that gets applied to a graph to find a line that fits the pattern. So in this case, the slope would look something like this. And the correlation coefficient is a number between -1 and 1. And if it's a positive number, then that means that the correlation is positive. So in this case, from this correlation coefficient being 0.843 for this example, that means that the Radioactive Boars play better when they play better defenses. So if you already have your thinking cap on, how can we apply this to teams already in the NFL? Well, we could see whether or not a team is not impacted by good defenses at all, which means they're super resilient, or a team could be deeply impacted by the defenses they play, and they would have a negative correlation coefficient. And so we want to see, basically what we're trying to see is how much does it matter, or how much does the defense matter that Mahomes, Burrow, and Allen are facing? Does the defense have a strong impact on how they perform, or does the defense have very little impact? And statistically speaking, if you're an offense, you want the defense to have a minimal impact. You want to be able to say, we don't care who the defense is. We can beat whoever, and we can hang points on whoever. The defense doesn't impact us. It doesn't matter how good they are. We're going to score points regardless. So the first quarterback that I evaluated, and keep in mind, I took all of their game data, the defensive SRS for each team they faced each season, and then also the points that they scored. So we'll start with the quarterback who finished last out of these 3, and that is Joe Burrow. So Joe Burrow had a correlation coefficient of almost -0.5. As far as correlation coefficients go, that's fairly impactful. It's not a strong correlation, but it's not a weak correlation either. It's a medium correlation. So you can say that Joe Burrow has been impacted by good defenses more so than Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. The quarterback who finished second place is Patrick Mahomes. I know a lot of you wanted to think, hey, yeah, Mahomes is awesome. Doesn't matter who he's playing. He's going to whoop that defense's butt. And it's actually that as far as their play goes over the course of their entire careers, Mahomes has been impacted by good defenses more so than Josh Allen. His correlation coefficient is about 0.3, which is not a strong correlation. I would say it's less than medium. So I would say it maybe slightly above a weak correlation. And you can see all the data points, the defensive SRS score, and then the point totals for each game, and then the downward trending line. So good defenses have had an impact on Mahomes' performance. So unfortunately, when I go and make my prediction for 2022, I can't jump in and just say, I don't have to pay attention to what the defenses are going to do next year. It doesn't matter. Andy Reid doesn't care. I have to take a small amount of detail or a small amount of care towards the defenses that the Chiefs are going to play next year. And then last, we have Josh Allen. And he had the lowest correlation coefficient when I did this over the course of his career is minus 0.2. So he's still impacted negatively by defenses, but over the totality of his career, not so much as Mahomes is. And now when we say they're negatively impacted by the defenses that they play, the better the defense, the worse they play, you have to have the next question of impacted from where. So if one player's bar is way up here and another player's bar is down here, maybe it doesn't matter if defenses impact that player more or impact that team more, because the bar for the other team is so much higher that it kind of makes that difference trivial. And I do want to note from Josh Allen's data, there is an outlier here where they scored over 55 points against a team that had an above average SRS rating. And I have to wonder how much this outlier impacted the data. But back to the starting point, or where the teams are overall from a statistical standpoint, I'm not going to say that I think Josh Allen is better than Patrick Mahomes. And this is why. Because the ground that Mahomes is coming from, his floor, is so much higher than Josh Allen's that, in my opinion, there's really no question which quarterback is the best out of these three. I mean, it's not even an argument. Patrick Mahomes has a higher rating. He has more passing touchdowns per game. He has higher passing yards per game. He has higher total yards per game. He has higher total touchdowns per game. He has higher points per game. He averages over 30 points per game, whereas Josh Allen has 24.7. I think the real argument, if you want to have one, is not between Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen. The real argument is between Joe Burrow and Josh Allen. Which one of those two quarterbacks is better? Joe Burrow's sample size is small. He hasn't played a lot of seasons. He hasn't played as many seasons as Allen. He hasn't played as many seasons as Mahomes. But I think the argument for who's better is between those two and not between Mahomes and Allen. Because like I said, the bar that Mahomes has set and the variance that he's seeing with his correlation coefficient is already much higher than the bar that Josh Allen has set. So while it is true that Josh Allen's offense has been more resilient, they've been more mediocrely resilient than Mahomes. Mahomes has had a higher plane, and he's been impacted more by good defenses, but he's starting off from such a higher position that I don't think that Josh Allen and Mahomes' resilience, the differences there, make Josh Allen a better quarterback. In fact, I think Mahomes, hands down, is much better than both these quarterbacks. But it was interesting to see how resilient Josh Allen's play has been, and I do give a lot of props to him. He's a great quarterback, but my money's on Mahomes. So with that ends our video. Make sure to like and subscribe. This is RGR Football. Once again, it was a blast. Send me ideas. The next video I'm going to try to work on is I'm going to look for historical significance or historical relevance for teams that lost a player like Tyreek Hill, that had a good quarterback like Patrick Mahomes. What happened to those teams? And that'll be the second part of this little journey that we're on. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.